My wife cheated with her boss during our decade-long marriage, then secretly transferred $250, $0 from our joint account to buy a dream house for her and her affair partner. Now she's denying everything while I find evidence of forged signatures and plans to sue her for fraud. Hello everyone. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin the video. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons, with certain specifics modified to preserve anonymity. I never imagined I'd find myself in a situation like this, but here I am, and honestly it's like the worst soap opera you've ever seen. The thing is, my wife Emily and I had been married for over 10 years. We had it all: good jobs, a nice house, a couple of kids. I thought we were solid, you know. But then, out of nowhere, I started noticing little things that didn't add up. At first, I just brushed it off. Emily was acting a bit more distant, spending more time on her phone, coming home late from work more often than usual. She'd get defensive if I asked about her day. Snap at me over nothing. Small signs, but enough to make me suspicious. It all started to come apart when I found her phone one night. I was just trying to print a document and I saw a message pop up on her screen. It was from some guy named Jake. At first I thought it was just a colleague, but then I saw the tone: too familiar, too intimate. They were talking about plans, about meeting up after hours, stuff that clearly wasn't about work. My stomach clenched. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I knew I shouldn't have looked further, but I couldn't stop myself. I went through her messages, her emails, and what I found was worse than I expected. Turns out Emily's been cheating on me with her boss, Mark. They've been having an affair for months, maybe longer. I found explicit texts, photos, even plans to meet up somewhere fancy, an excuse to be alone together. It was like a punch to the face. How could she do this? After 10 years, after everything we built, I felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and pure shock. I couldn't believe I had been blind for so long. She always seemed so perfect, so dedicated to the family, but behind my back she was sneaking around with her boss, and from what I uncovered, it wasn't just sex. She was in love with him, or at least she wanted to be. The worst part: the money. I found out she secretly transferred $250, $0 from our joint account to buy a house for her and Mark. She's been planning this behind my back, hiding it all from me. I couldn't even process how she could be so ruthless, so cold. This wasn't just cheating, she was planning her escape, using our savings like it was nothing. I felt numb but also furious. How could she lie so effortlessly? She kept denying everything when I confronted her, acting like I was crazy or overreacting. But I had the evidence: screenshots, bank statements, forged signatures on documents. She was trying to cover her tracks, but I saw through every lie. That night I sat in our living room, staring at the evidence I'd gathered. My head was spinning. I kept asking myself how I missed all these signs, how I could have been so blind. I was supposed to be her partner, her confidant. Instead, I found out she was cheating and planning to leave me with a huge financial mess. The pain was overwhelming, but beneath it all, there was this burning need to do something, to take control of this mess she made. I knew I couldn't just let her get away with it. I had to act, and fast. That's when I started to plan my revenge, but I'll tell you about that in the next part. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding head and an even heavier heart. I knew I couldn't let Emily keep pulling the wool over my eyes any longer. The evidence was clear, and I had to confront her again, this time with everything laid out on the table. I stayed up all night, going through every message, every bank statement, every forged signature I'd uncovered. The more I looked, the more I realized how deep her deception ran. I decided to call her at work. I figured if she was going to deny everything, I needed to be ready. When she picked up, her voice was cold, dismissive, like she already knew what I was going to say. I told her I knew about Mark, about the affair, about the money. For a moment there was silence on the line. Then she started with her usual bullshit, saying I was paranoid, that I was imagining things, that she loved me and was just stressed from work. She even had the nerve to call me insecure, like I was the problem. But I wasn't born yesterday. I had the proof, and I knew she was lying. I told her I was coming home early that day. I needed to see her face when I laid everything out. When I arrived, she was already acting like I was overreacting, trying to brush it off. But I was done playing nice. I pulled out the bank statements, the forged signatures, the plan to buy the house. Her eyes widened, then narrowed with anger. She started yelling, calling me paranoid, accusing me of invading her privacy, twisting everything around to make herself look innocent. But I wasn't buying it. I told her I knew about her plans to leave me, to run off with Mark, and I was sick of her lies. The emotional roller coaster hit me hard. I was furious, devastated, humiliated. How did I miss all of this? How did she manage to keep this secret for so long? I felt like I'd been punched in the gut again and again. The woman I'd trusted, the one I'd built a life with, she was cheating, lying, planning her escape while I was clueless. I couldn't sleep that night, replaying everything, feeling betrayed beyond words. The worst part was realizing how she had manipulated me, how she'd made me doubt myself for so long. I'd always been the one trying to fix things, to keep the peace, and she was just playing with my feelings like a game. But I also knew I had to decide what to do next. I couldn't stay in this toxic situation anymore. I had to protect myself and my kids, and that meant making some tough choices. I started reaching out to a lawyer, gathering all the evidence, planning my next moves. I wasn't going to let her walk away with our money, with our house, without a fight. I was prepared to sue her for fraud, to get that money back, and to hold her accountable for what she'd done. The betrayal was one thing, but the financial damage was another. She crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The days that followed were a blur of legal consultations, emotional exhaustion, and planning. I cut off all communication with Emily, refusing to be manipulated anymore. I knew I had to stay strong, not just for myself, but for my kids too. I couldn't let her tear everything apart. Deep down, I felt a mix of fury and sadness, but I also knew I had to be strategic. She was a master manipulator, and I had to outsmart her if I wanted any hope of getting justice. I started documenting everything, making sure I had a solid case. I was prepared to fight for what was rightfully mine. And that's where I stand now, ready to take her to court, ready to expose her lies, and ready to rebuild my life from the wreckage she left behind. I don't know how it's going to end yet, but I do know one thing. I won't be a victim of her schemes. Not anymore. The legal process moved faster than I expected once I handed over all the evidence. My lawyer, a sharp guy named David, told me I had a strong case for fraud and breach of trust. The forged signatures on the documents transferring the money, the secret plans for the house, everything pointed to premeditated deception. Emily kept insisting she was innocent, that I was overreacting, that I didn't understand her busy life and her stress. She even had the nerve to say I was paranoid, that I was imagining things. But I knew better. I had the proof, and I was ready to fight. The first court hearing was a whirlwind. Emily showed up looking bitchy and defensive, trying to act like everything was normal. She tried to deny the affair, claiming I was making it all up out of jealousy. She looked me straight in the eyes and said she loved me, that I was her husband and she'd never cheat. It was laughable, honestly. She was so good at lying, she almost convinced herself. But I didn't buy a word of it. I knew what I saw, what I had proof of, and I wasn't backing down. During the hearing, I presented the bank statements, the forged signatures, the text messages, and the plans for the house. The judge looked over everything carefully, asking Emily some tough questions. She blubbered, tried to spin her stories, but it was clear she was caught. The evidence was damning. The judge ordered her to freeze her accounts, prevent her from making any more transfers, and set a date for the next hearing to review the case further. I felt a tiny sense of relief, knowing I was finally getting some justice. But the real shock came when I found out about the house. Emily had already transferred the money. Actually, she'd forged my signature on the documents so she could buy a place with Mark. A big, fancy house in the suburbs. I couldn't believe she'd gone so far. The house was almost fully paid for, and she was planning to move in with him. That's when it hit me. She'd been planning her escape for months, using our joint savings as her ticket out. I felt sick to my stomach. How could she do this? How could she betray everything we had built? I started to feel angry again, but this time it was different. It was a cold, focused anger. I realized I couldn't trust her anymore, not as my wife, not as a partner. She'd lied, manipulated, and stolen from me, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I made a decision then and there. I was going to fight to keep what's mine, to protect my kids, and to make sure she paid for what she'd done. I contacted a forensic accountant to trace the money further, making sure there weren't any other hidden accounts or transfers. I was determined to make her pay for her lies. Meanwhile, Emily kept playing her games. She denied everything, claiming I was jealous and paranoid. She accused me of spying on her, of trying to ruin her reputation. She even tried to turn our friends and family against me, saying I was overreacting and that she loved me. But I could see through her lies now. I knew her game. I had the evidence, and I was ready to take her to court for everything. I also started preparing for the possibility of divorce, knowing that I couldn't keep living under her shadow anymore. The betrayal cut deep, but I was determined to come out of this stronger. In the meantime, I kept my emotions in check. I focused on the legal battle ahead, on protecting my kids, and on gathering more evidence. I wanted to make sure that when everything was said and done, Emily couldn't deny what she'd done. I also started talking to a therapist, something I'd never done before, to process all the pain and betrayal. It wasn't easy, but I knew I needed to stay sane through this chaos. Every day brought a new surprise, more lies, more manipulations from her side, but I refused to be manipulated anymore. I was finally taking control of my life, and I was going to see this through to the end. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Emily continued to deny everything, even as I presented more evidence. She tried to spin her lies, claiming I was paranoid, that I was jealous of her success with Mark, and that I was just trying to control her. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. I had seen too much, uncovered too many lies. The forensic accountant found more irregularities, hidden accounts, additional transfers, and other forged signatures I hadn't even known about. It was clear she'd been planning this for months, maybe even years. One day, I decided I'd had enough of her denials. I confronted her directly. I told her I knew about the house, about her affair, about the money, that I had all the evidence and I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way out of this. She looked at me with that bitchy smirk, trying to act innocent. She started with her usual excuses, saying she was stressed, that Mark was just a friend, that the money was a loan she was going to pay back. Yeah, right. I told her I didn't buy her lies anymore. I was done. That confrontation was intense. She yelled, called me controlling, accused me of spying on her. She said I was just jealous, that I didn't understand her busy life, that she deserved happiness too. But I saw through her crap. I told her I was done being her fool, that I'd be taking her to court for fraud and breach of trust. I told her she could deny everything, but the truth was out in the open now. The evidence was irrefutable. Her face twisted with anger and frustration, but she didn't have anything left to say. I could see the anger simmering behind her eyes, but I also saw the cracks in her carefully constructed lies. At this point, I knew I had to prepare for the worst. I reached out to a divorce lawyer, started drafting papers. I wanted full custody of the kids, the house, and the money she'd stolen. I also wanted her to be held accountable for the fraud, for the lies, for the cheating. I wasn't just after revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. I knew she'd fight dirty, so I started documenting everything, every message, every bank record, every forged signature. I was laying the groundwork for a legal battle I was determined to win. Meanwhile, Emily's attitude grew more defiant. She refused to admit any guilt, kept claiming she was the victim. She even tried to manipulate some of our friends into believing I was overreacting. But I had the evidence, and I wasn't about to let her gaslight me into backing down. I also put a freeze on her accounts so she couldn't access any more of the money she'd stolen. I was making sure she couldn't run away with everything. Every day, I felt more determined. I was sick of feeling betrayed, sick of feeling like I was the fool. This was a war, and I was going to win it. One thing I learned during this process is how deep betrayal can cut. It's like a wound that refuses to heal, no matter how much you try to ignore it. But I also learned that you can't let it define you. I was angry, yes, furious at her lies and her manipulations. But I also realized I had to stay strong for my kids and myself. I couldn't let her destroy what was left of our lives. I started seeing a therapist regularly, just to keep my head clear and to process everything I was feeling. It helped, even if only a little. I knew that the legal fight was just beginning and I was prepared for a long haul. I couldn't wait to see her face when she realized I wasn't backing down. She thought she could lie her way out of this, but I had the truth, and I was going to make sure she paid for the betrayal. Every day brought new surprises, more lies, more manipulations, but I was ready. I'd come too far to turn back now. This was my life, and I was going to reclaim it no matter what. The court date finally arrived, and I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. I'd spent weeks preparing every piece of evidence, every detail, making sure nothing was overlooked. Emily showed up with her lawyer, looking defiant and dismissive, like she thought she could talk her way out of it. She kept insisting she was innocent, that I was overreacting, that the money transfer was a mistake, that Mark was just a friend. I kept my cool, knowing I had the facts on my side. The judge listened carefully as my lawyer laid out everything: proof of the forged signatures, the bank transfers, the secret plans for the house, the affair. When Emily tried to deny the affair outright, I pulled out the explicit messages, the photos, the hotel receipts, everything. Her face paled for a moment, then she started to sputter, trying to justify herself. She claimed she was confused, that she didn't mean for it to go this far. She said she loved me but needed something more in her life. That made my blood boil. How could she sit there and lie so convincingly? I realized then that her manipulating tactics weren't going to work anymore. The evidence was irrefutable, and the judge saw it too. The judge ordered an immediate freeze on her assets, including the house she was planning to buy with Mark. They also scheduled a future hearing to determine the full extent of the financial fraud. I felt a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe now I'd get some justice. But the real shock came when the court revealed that Emily had already transferred $250, $0 from our joint account into her own name, forging my signature on the documents. She'd been planning her escape for months, and I was just catching up. The judge looked furious, and I knew this was the beginning of a long fight. What hit me hardest was realizing how much I'd been blindsided. I'd trusted her for over a decade. I'd believed in our life, in our marriage. But she'd been secretly planning her new life with Mark, using our savings as her ticket out. The betrayal was so deep I couldn't even put it into words. I felt like I was drowning, but at the same time, I had a newfound resolve. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I'd fight for everything: my money, my kids, my dignity. After the court session, I started to piece everything together in my head. The lies, the manipulations, the forged signatures. I knew she'd try to deny everything, but I had enough evidence to prove her guilt beyond any doubt. I also began thinking about the next steps: filing for divorce, getting sole custody, and making sure she paid for what she'd done. I was angry, yes, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. This was the end of our chapter, and I was finally ready to turn the page. I spent the following days talking to my lawyer, working out the legal details, and preparing for the upcoming hearings. I also started gathering witnesses, friends and family who might testify about her behavior, her lies, her manipulation. I wanted everything on record. I knew Emily would fight dirty, just like she always did, but I was determined not to let her win. I'd come too far. I'd lost a lot, but I was still standing, still fighting for what's rightfully mine. I'd been betrayed in the worst way, but I was also learning how to stand up and fight back. That's what this was really about: taking back control and making her face the consequences of her actions. The final court hearing was a few weeks later, and I went into it knowing I had everything lined up. The evidence was solid, the witnesses were prepared, and my resolve was unshakable. Emily, on the other hand, looked more desperate than ever. She tried once again to deny everything, claiming I was making her out to be some villain. She spun stories about how she was misunderstood and how she'd been under so much stress that she just snapped. It was pathetic. I could see through her act now. She'd been lying from day one. When the judge finally spoke, the room fell silent. The judge called out the facts: the forged signatures, the illegal transfer of funds, the secret plans for the house, the affair. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge ordered her to pay back every penny she stole, including interest and penalties. She was also ordered to relinquish the property she'd bought with that money and to pay a significant fine for her fraud. The judge made it clear that her actions were unacceptable and that she'd crossed legal boundaries, betraying not just me but the entire foundation of our marriage. As I listened to the verdict, I felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. It was like finally exhaling after holding my breath for so long. I couldn't believe she'd gone so far, but I was proud that I'd fought for myself and my kids. I also received sole custody of our children, which was a huge relief. They deserved stability, and I was determined to give them that, free from her lies and manipulations. The court's decision felt like a victory, one I fought for with everything I had. In the days that followed, I began the process of rebuilding. I filed for divorce, started the paperwork to separate our assets, and began the long road of healing. I also kept my distance from Emily. She was trying to reach out, but I refused to let her manipulate me anymore. I realized that the greatest revenge was living well, moving forward, and making sure her betrayal didn't define me. I also took the time to reflect on what I'd learned. Trust is fragile, but strength comes from facing betrayal head-on and refusing to be broken. Looking back, I see how much I've grown from this experience. I learned that even when life throws you the worst, you can still stand tall. Trust is earned and betrayal cuts deep, but it also teaches you who you really are. I've become more cautious, more aware of the people around me, but also more resilient. I've finally let go of the anger that once consumed me, replacing it with a quiet determination to move on and rebuild my life on my own terms. Now I focus on my kids, my career, and the future I want to create. Emily's gone, and honestly, I don't miss her. What I do miss is the trust we once had, but I know now that some betrayals are so deep, they leave scars that never fully heal. Still, those scars remind me of my strength and my ability to survive the worst. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone going through something similar, it's this: don't let betrayal define you. Fight for your peace, your dignity, and your future. Because at the end of the day, you're the only one who truly controls your life.